When Grandpa passed away, all he left me was a rusty old bee farm on the edge of nowhere. No money, no land with beach, front views, no antique car collection, just a cluster of wooden hives buzzing with what everyone else in the family called 1,000 stinging liabilities. My parents didn't even bother showing up to the reading of his will. They assumed, like always, that I'd get nothing of value. So when I told them I was moving out of the city and taking over Grandpa's bee farm, they laughed. Not a chuckle. Not a soft, confused giggle. No full-on stomach holding tears. In their eyes laughter, "You're joking, right?" My mom had asked between gasps. "You bees, you're scared of butterflies," Dad added with a smirk. "What's next? Raising chickens in a condo, selling fresh air in jars." To them, it was insane. I had a decent desk job, a small but decent apartment in the city, and according to them, a future. Trading it for dusty fields, wooden boxes, and the threat of bee stings. That was me throwing my life away. But what they didn't understand, what they never could understand, was that Grandpa's farm wasn't useless. It was sacred, it was memory, it was legacy. When I was a kid, summers at the bee farm were magical. While Mom and Dad jetted off on business trips or attended networking galas, Grandpa let me play in the wildflower fields, taught me how to move slowly around the hives, and called bees tiny golden workers of the earth. He told me that everything good in life, honey, growth, community, took time and patience. He never pushed, he never judged, he just loved quietly, fully. So when the old lawyer handed me that weathered envelope with the deed inside, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my life in 2 days, left the noise, left the expectations, and left behind the cold, dismissive scoffs of my parents. Still, the sting of their laughter followed me all the way to the farm. The place was worse than I remembered. Overgrown grass clawed at the fences, and half the hives were rotting. The farmhouse creaked with every step, and the wind seemed to whisper doubt through the broken window panes. But I didn't turn back, not once. My first night there, I sat on the porch with a dusty photo of Grandpa, his eyes twinkling even in black and white. I lit a small candle, set it next to the picture, and whispered, "I'm here," just like I said I'd be. And in that moment, the bees, distant in the dark, hummed a low, soft note. Like they were listening, like they remembered too. I woke the next morning to silence, no traffic, no phones ringing, just the rustle of leaves and the low hum of life. It was peaceful for about 5 minutes. Then I stepped into the apiary and realized I had no idea what I was doing. The hives were a mess, cracked wood, warped lids. Weeds sprouting from the ground like the farm had been trying to reclaim itself. I pulled on the old bee suit that smelled like mothballs and age, bracing myself. Grandpa always moved with grace around the bees. I moved like I was defusing a bomb. First inspection, total disaster. I dropped a frame, got stung twice, knocked over a smoker, and burned my glove. The bees didn't care that I was grieving, or that I was trying my best. They only cared that I was clumsy and loud. By sunset, I was sitting in the grass, hands throbbing, knees bruised, and confidence shattered. The photo of Grandpa I'd kept in my backpack felt heavier than the bee boxes. I looked up at the peeling paint on the farmhouse, the busted fence, the tools rusting in the shed, and for the first time, I wondered if my parents were right. Maybe I was just playing farmer. But then I found the letters. Tucked in a box inside Grandpa's old workbench were envelopes. Each one labeled in his shaky handwriting, "For when you feel alone, for when you think you're failing, for when you feel like giving up." That night, under a flickering porch light, I opened the first one. Beekeeping isn't about control. It's about trust. Trust the process, trust the bees, and trust yourself. You were made for this, even if you don't believe it yet. His words hit me like honey warming through teeth, soft, steady, comforting. I clutched the letter to my chest and cried for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm of the farm began to shape me. Early mornings, sweaty afternoons, quiet, lonesome dinners. Every day I learned something new. How to read a hive, how to spot the queen, how to calm the bees with smoke instead of fear. I burned through notebooks with Grandpa's scribbled diagrams and notes, piecing together the fragments of his legacy like a puzzle. Money was tight. I sold my watch, took up freelance writing gigs at night. I bartered jars of old honey for eggs and bread with neighbors who barely remembered me. They eyed me with mild pity, calling me the city kid playing farm. Still, they didn't laugh like my parents did. And they didn't stop me, either. And then something changed. I took a jar of my first new harvest, golden, thick, impossibly sweet, and posted it online with the caption, "First honey from Grandpa's farm. I hope it makes him proud." I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, but by morning the post had thousands of shares. A local blogger picked it up. Then a natural food store asked for samples. Then a woman from 2 states over offered to pay double if I could ship it in time for her wedding. For the first time, the bees weren't the only ones buzzing. Still, I said nothing to my parents. At the next family dinner, I sat quietly while they talked about corporate promotions, stock investments, and who bought a Tesla. When they asked how my bee thing was going, I smiled and said, "It's keeping me busy." They exchanged a look, the kind people give when they don't want to say what they're really thinking. Probably figured I'd come crawling back eventually, but I didn't, not even close. By autumn, the hives were thriving. My bees were healthy, active, and producing honey that gleamed like liquid gold. The secret, patience, persistence, and the quiet whispers of Grandpa's, notes that I still read before bed. But it wasn't just the bees that had changed, it was me. Gone was the unsure city kid, fumbling with frames and running from stings. In their place stood someone who knew how to listen to the hum of life. Someone who could smell rain in the air and feel the seasons shifting with the flowers. I had calluses on my hands and peace in my chest, and a business quietly blooming. After that first viral post, things moved fast. Orders flooded my inbox. I created a simple online store with handcrafted labels, inspired by Grandpa's old beekeeping journal. People loved the story, loved the authenticity. They weren't just buying honey, they were buying legacy. Memory, I returned to something real. I named the brand Golden Echo. A nod to how the bees work echoed Grandpa's teachings, and now mine. Soon, local farmers' markets invited me, then boutiques, then wellness brands. A food blogger with a massive following wrote a glowing review and compared my honey to sunlight in a jar. Sales spiked overnight. Still, I kept everything small and intentional, no mass production, no additives. Just raw, wild honey from Grandpa's old hives, bottled by his granddaughter. Meanwhile, my parents kept pretending I'd failed. They never asked about the farm, never asked how I paid bills or managed to stay so busy. At the annual family brunch, my mother leaned across the table and said with a forced smile, "You know, there's no shame in admitting when something doesn't work out." I smiled back, sweet as syrup. "You're right, but sometimes things work out better than you could ever imagine." They didn't get it. They didn't ask, they didn't want to know, because to them, success wore suits and sat in boardrooms. Success didn't come in glass jars or hum beneath flowers. I let them think what they wanted, because truthfully, I didn't need their approval anymore. I had the bees, I had Grandpa's voice in the wind. I had loyal customers who sent handwritten letters and photos of my honey on their wedding tables, in their grandmother's tea, drizzled over Sunday pancakes. And I had something they never understood, purpose. One chilly morning, just before winter came, I walked through the apiary with a thermos of tea and a heavy coat. The bees were slowing down for the season, tucking into their hives to ride out the cold. I placed a hand on one of the boxes and whispered, "We did it." Later that night, I visited Grandpa's grave for the first time since moving to the farm. I brought a small jar of our newest harvest, set it on the headstone, and said the words I'd been saving for a year. They laughed, but we kept going, and now, they don't even know what's coming. Because I had just gotten an email. A major organic food distributor wanted to partner. A television crew wanted to film a mini-documentary about the beekeeper who turned grief into gold. And my next harvest, already pre-ordered to the last jar, was expected to triple in value, the best part. My name was spreading, not theirs. I didn't just inherit a farm. I inherited a revolution. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of cold, gray day that used to make me feel small and forgotten. But this time I felt nothing but peace. I was labeling the final batch of pre-orders in the kitchen, beeswax candles burning low on the counter, when I heard the sound of tires crunching wet gravel. Not the postman, not a neighbor. No, this was slower, unfamiliar. I peeked out the window and saw a luxury SUV struggling up the muddy drive. I knew it before they even stepped out. Mom in heels completely unfit for the dirt. Dad in a raincoat, too clean for the countryside. Their faces were tight, rehearsed, polite, and strained in a way that told me everything. They weren't just visiting. They needed something. I opened the door and said nothing, just waited. The silence between us buzzed louder than the hives. "Sweetheart," Mom began, forcing a smile. "You look healthy." "Thriving," Dad added, nodding like that word had just entered his vocabulary. I didn't invite them in. They stood under the awning, damp, awkward, clearly hoping I'd make it easier. But I let the silence stretch. They'd earned it. Finally, Mom exhaled. "We've had some changes. Your father's firm downsized. We sold the condo. And well, we've been thinking about how we were wrong." Dad interrupted, his voice lower now. "About the farm, about you, about everything." That caught me off guard. "We see what you've built," Mom continued. "Your name is everywhere. That honey, it's in stores in our neighborhood. And that documentary, we saw it twice. Your father cried. I did not." Dad muttered, but there was no fight in him. They looked different now. Not the towering critics I once feared, but two aging people who realized they'd bet against the wrong dream. "And lost, we want to help," Mom said carefully. "We'd like to join you if you'll let us." 100 memories hit me all at once, their laughter, the ridicule, the eye rolls at family dinners, the way they looked down at Grandpa's legacy like it was beneath them. And now here they stood, hoping I'd make room for them in the very life they told me was a waste. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt full circle. I crossed my arms. "You want to help with this." I gestured to the fields, the hives, the mud on their polished shoes. "This is the useless little bee farm you laughed at." Dad looked down. Mom actually had the grace to look ashamed. "Yes," she whispered. "We were wrong, and we're sorry." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they healed everything, but because I realized something right then. I didn't need revenge. I had already won. I'd built something sacred out of something they discarded. I'd turned a dying legacy into a living one. I was the keeper of Grandpa's dream now, and I got there alone. But maybe I didn't have to stay alone. "All right," I said finally, "you want in. You wake up at 5 a.m. You wear boots. You learn to love bees, not just honey, and you don't get to lead, you follow." Dad blinked. "Follow," I nodded. "Yes, you work, you listen. You respect what you once dismissed. That's the only way this works," Mom swallowed. "We can do that." So I opened the door, not out of weakness, not out of forgetting, but because Grandpa taught me that bees don't survive alone. They build together, each one doing their part for the hive, no matter how late they arrive, and if they were finally ready to do the work, then maybe, just maybe, they could learn what it meant to build something that lasts.